As the clock ticks closer to midnight on New Year's Eve, there's an air of magic and mystery. It's a time when the old year fades away, and the promise of a new beginning takes hold. For most, it's a night of joy, laughter, and celebration, a chance to gather with loved ones, toast to fresh starts, and create memories that will last a lifetime. But for some, New Year's Eve holds a different kind of significance. It's a night where the veil between the familiar and the unknown seems thinner, where fleeting moments can leave behind shadows that linger long after the confetti has settled. Imagine standing in a room filled with friends and the warm glow of laughter, only to feel a creeping unease that you can't explain. Or stepping outside to greet the crisp winter air, only to find yourself glancing over your shoulder, certain that someone, or something, is watching. The stories you're about to hear are rooted in these moments, where the cheer of celebration meets the unsettling chill of the unexpected. They remind us that even amidst the fireworks and festivities, the unknown can find its way into our lives, turning an ordinary night into something unforgettable. New Year's Eve has always been more than just a calendar date. It's a time for reflection, a bridge between what has been and what could be. And for the people in these stories, it's a night they will never forget, though perhaps they wish they could. As we embark on this journey through chilling encounters and unexplained events, keep the spirit of the season close. The line between joy and dread can sometimes be razor thin, and tonight, we walk it together. The air was festive, filled with music, chatter, and the unmistakable energy of a New Year's Eve party. The living room was alive with laughter as groups of friends shared drinks, exchanged stories, and played games. It was the kind of night where the world outside seemed to pause, allowing everyone inside to live fully in the moment. But amidst the warmth and camaraderie, something strange was brewing. It started with a knock at the door. The kind of knock that should have been ordinary, but somehow wasn't. It came at a moment when everyone was too engrossed in the celebration to notice, except for one person, a curious soul who decided to investigate. Opening the door revealed a woman, unfamiliar yet strangely composed, claiming to be there for the party. She stepped inside, seamlessly blending into the atmosphere. Her presence was fleeting, almost forgettable, as she disappeared into the crowd. The night wore on, filled with the usual revelry of ringing in a new year. Midnight came and went, champagne glasses clinked, and goodbyes were exchanged as the party began to wind down. Yet, as the hours stretched into the early morning, an unsettling realization took hold: no one had seen the woman again. Her brief appearance felt like a fleeting shadow, raising a question that lingered in the quiet aftermath of the celebration. Who was she? Why had she come? And why did it feel like she had left something behind, something intangible, yet undeniably present? The events of that night would unravel into a story that neither the host nor the guests could ever quite forget, leaving them to wonder if their paths had crossed with someone, or something, they couldn't begin to explain. The warm glow of the party had faded, leaving behind the quiet hum of a house no longer filled with laughter and voices. It was well past midnight, and only a few guests remained to help clean up. The sense of camaraderie lingered as they worked together, picking up discarded cups and tidying the remnants of the celebration. The house, once so lively, now felt still, almost too still. The stillness was shattered by a sound. It wasn't loud or overtly alarming, but in the silence, it carried an undeniable weight. A faint noise coming from the direction of the kitchen. Both Alex, the host, and the remaining guests paused, their eyes meeting in mutual confusion. Alex, always one to act on instinct, moved cautiously toward the sound. He whispered to his friend that it might be nothing, a loose pipe, perhaps, or the wind, but the tension in his voice betrayed his unease. As Alex approached the kitchen, the faint noise became clearer, a soft shuffling, almost like someone was trying to move without being heard. He stopped at the closed kitchen door, his heart pounding in his chest. Gathering his courage, he called out, warning whoever might be there that he was armed. His voice was firm but edged with fear. The response was chilling, a man's voice from the other side of the door, calmly stating that he, too, was armed. The situation escalated in an instant. Alex and his friend bolted up the stairs, locking themselves in the bedroom, adrenaline now coursing through their veins. The once welcoming home had become a place of fear and uncertainty. From their position upstairs, they dialed the police, their hushed voices sharing details of the intruder below. Every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified as they waited, the seconds stretching into what felt like hours. When the police finally arrived, their presence brought a wave of relief. However, the sense of safety was fleeting. The intruder was gone, leaving behind an open window and signs of a hurried search through Alex's belongings. Items of value were missing, but the questions the night left behind were far heavier than the material losses. It wasn't until the adrenaline began to fade that Alex's friend remembered something, the mysterious woman from earlier in the evening. Her face came back into focus, and the realization hit like a jolt. She had disappeared not long after arriving, and now her presence seemed far less benign. Sharing this memory with Alex confirmed an unsettling suspicion: she might have been working with the intruder, her arrival a calculated move to lower their guard. As the night gave way to dawn, Alex and his friends sat in the aftermath, grappling with the events that had unfolded. The party was meant to usher in a new year filled with hope and celebration, but instead, it left them with a lingering sense of unease and unanswered questions. The night had settled into an eerie calm as the family drifted off to sleep, their house enveloped in the quiet of a winter evening. Upstairs, the child, excited from staying up past midnight for the first time, had retreated to his room. The thrill of the new year was still fresh in his mind as he powered up his PlayStation, the faint hum of the console breaking the silence. The room was warm, almost stifling, and the frosty winter air outside promised relief. He cracked open the window slightly, letting the crisp breeze slip inside. As the game loaded, a sound cut through the night, a car door closing. It was faint but distinct, and it made him pause. Their street was usually quiet, especially at this hour. His curiosity piqued, he moved to the window. Looking out, he noticed an unfamiliar sedan parked on the street. Before he could make sense of it, the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow drew his attention. He craned his neck, trying to see who it was, but the figure disappeared around the side of the house, heading toward the backyard. The unease settled in his chest as he left his room, quietly making his way downstairs. The darkness was oppressive, the silence almost deafening as he reached a back window. Peering out, he saw a shadowy figure standing near the edge of their yard, motionless and ominous. The dim light barely illuminated the man, who seemed to be surveying the area. The boy froze, his breath caught in his throat. After what felt like an eternity, the man turned and began walking back toward the house. Panic surged through him as he bolted back upstairs, his heart hammering in his chest. He locked himself in his room, hoping desperately that the man would leave. But moments later, the stillness was broken by a knock at the front door. The sound reverberated through the house, sharp and deliberate. He waited, listening intently, hoping someone else in the family would hear it. But no one stirred. A second knock came, more insistent this time. He crept back to his window and looked out, his hands trembling. The man stood on the front step, his figure illuminated by the faint glow of a street lamp. He didn't move, didn't say a word, just stood there. The boy's mind raced with questions. Who was this man? What did he want? Minutes passed, each one dragging on endlessly. Finally, the man turned and walked back to his car. The engine roared to life, and the car disappeared into the night, leaving behind only questions and a lingering sense of dread. The next morning, he recounted the events to his parents. They were as baffled as he was. The mystery of the man in the yard and the knocks at the door remained unsolved. The boy couldn't shake the image of the stranger standing there, his presence as haunting as the unanswered questions he left behind. Even years later, the memory of that New Year's Eve lingered, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking just outside their door. The party was alive with energy, laughter, and the soft hum of music filling the air as friends and acquaintances gathered in the modest apartment. Conversations flowed freely, punctuated by bursts of laughter. It was a New Year's Eve celebration, the kind that promised a night of camaraderie and joy. Among the guests was the host, warmly welcoming everyone into his space, ensuring drinks were topped up and snacks replenished. The evening was progressing smoothly until an unexpected knock echoed through the apartment door. It wasn't particularly loud, but it sliced through the rhythm of the evening like a discordant note. The host hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly. No one else was expected. Still, he approached the door, curiosity compelling him. As he opened it, there was nothing, no one standing there, no sign of anyone in the hallway. A faint breeze whispered through the corridor, and the host glanced left and right before dismissing it as a prank. Returning to the party, he brushed off the odd occurrence and rejoined the group. But the knocking persisted. Another sharp rap at the door a short while later drew the attention of everyone in the room. A few exchanged puzzled looks while others speculated about the prankster's identity. The host, now slightly irritated, rushed to the door again. This time, he caught a fleeting glimpse, a figure darting around the corner, out of sight before he could react. Frustrated, he decided not to chase the person, instead returning to his guests and attempting to laugh it off. For a while, the party continued uninterrupted. People joked about the mysterious knocker, and the incident became part of the evening's stories. But as the night wore on and the guests began to trickle out, the knocks resumed, this time spaced further apart but somehow more deliberate. The host, now alone in his apartment, felt the weight of unease settle over him. The final knock came deep into the night, long after the party had ended and the laughter had faded. This time, it wasn't a quick, playful tap but a slow, deliberate sound, as if whoever was on the other side wanted to convey something far more unsettling. The host approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. Standing there was a man, tall and shadowy, his face partially obscured by the dim hallway light. Unlike before, the man didn't appear to be in a hurry to escape. He stood motionless, as though waiting. The host froze, his hand hovering over the doorknob, an internal battle raging within him. Should he confront the man, or should he retreat to the safety of his locked apartment? After what felt like an eternity, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the building's stairwell. The host didn't sleep that night. The following morning, he learned from a neighbor that a man in the building had been attacked by a stranger who knocked on his door late at night. The chilling realization struck him. He might have narrowly avoided becoming another victim. The host moved out of the apartment soon after, but the memory of that New Year's Eve and the haunting knocks at his door stayed with him, a lingering reminder of how thin the veil between safety and danger can be. The glow of New Year's celebrations had just started to fade as I drove my friends home after a night filled with laughter, music, and packed city bars. It had been a fun evening, and as the designated driver, I felt a sense of responsibility to get everyone back safely. The streets were quieter now, and the chill of the winter air seemed to seep into every corner of the city. After dropping off my last friend, the streets grew even more still. It was only a short drive back to my own apartment, but as I turned onto familiar roads, I began to notice something unsettling, a car behind me, its headlights unwavering. At first, I dismissed it as coincidence. After all, we had left the bars around the same time as many others, and it wasn't unusual for cars to head in similar directions. But the car's persistence soon felt deliberate. Every turn I made, it followed. Every stoplight, every side street, it stayed right behind me. My pulse quickened as unease turned into a creeping fear. I decided to test my suspicion. I made an unexpected turn down a random street, then another, and another. The car mirrored each move without hesitation. There was no doubt now, I was being followed. My mind raced with possibilities. Could it be someone from the bar? The thought of the older man who had approached me earlier flashed in my mind. He had seemed harmless enough at the time, but now, the memory of his gaze lingered, cold and invasive. As I approached my apartment building, I considered my options. I had a secure parking garage, but if I entered, there was no guarantee the car wouldn't follow me in. Instead, I pulled over just before the entrance, hoping the car would pass. It didn't. The driver also pulled over, just a few meters behind me. My breath hitched as adrenaline surged through my veins. In a split-second decision, I drove into the garage, letting the automated door begin to close behind me. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, my stomach dropped. The car had surged forward, sliding under the door before it could shut. They were in the garage now, too. I didn't stop. Instead, I pressed the gas and drove straight through to the other exit, my tires screeching against the concrete. My heart pounded as I made a beeline back to the streets, my eyes darting between the road and my rearview mirror. The car followed for a moment, but then, abruptly, it turned off onto another street. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered with lingering fear. Why had they stopped? Were they trying to scare me, or had I thrown off their plans by leaving the garage? I wasn't willing to find out. I drove directly to the nearest police station, where I parked and sat for several minutes, ensuring I was no longer being followed. That night, as I finally returned to my apartment, every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Sleep didn't come easily, and for weeks afterward, I found myself looking over my shoulder, avoiding bars, and questioning the motives of strangers. Whoever was following me that night didn't succeed in whatever they had planned, but their actions left a scar, a reminder that even in moments of celebration, danger can lurk in the shadows. The air was filled with a celebratory buzz, the kind of energy that only New Year's Eve can bring. Bars were packed, laughter echoed down the streets, and the city pulsed with life. Among the revelers was a group of friends, myself included, hopping between bars, clinking glasses, and embracing the promise of a fresh start. But as the night progressed, a shadow crept into the festivities. I wasn't drinking that evening, not because I didn't enjoy the occasional cocktail, but because I had volunteered to be the designated driver. As the night unfolded, I found myself observing more than participating, noticing details that might otherwise have escaped me. It was during one of those quiet moments, while sitting alone at the bar, that I noticed him, a man who didn't quite belong. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a long beard and equally long, unkempt hair. His presence wasn't loud or obnoxious, but something about him felt off. He approached me, leaning closer than was comfortable, and offered to buy me a drink. I declined politely, explaining that I wasn't drinking, but his response was unsettling, a lingering stare, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a casual, "Maybe later." I brushed it off, returning my attention to my friends on the dance floor. But even in the crowded bar, I could feel his gaze following me. Each time I glanced in his direction, there he was, watching, his eyes locked on mine as if cataloging every move I made. It wasn't long before we decided to move to another bar, and I hoped that would be the end of it. Yet, when we arrived at the next spot, he was there too. He kept his distance, but the familiarity of his presence sent a chill down my spine. Was it a coincidence, or had he followed us? The possibility gnawed at me, but I tried to stay calm, sticking close to my friends and avoiding his line of sight. As the night wound down, we made our way to my car. I had parked a few blocks away, and the streets were quieter now, the revelry of earlier hours fading into a softer hum. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but I told myself it was paranoia. My friends laughed and chatted as I drove, their voices filling the car with warmth that belied the growing unease in my chest. After dropping off the last of my friends, the streets grew eerily silent. It was then I noticed the headlights, a car that had been behind me since we left the bar. At first I thought nothing of it. But as I approached my apartment, every turn I made was mirrored. I slowed down, hoping the car would pass, but it didn't. Instead, it crept along behind me, a silent predator biding its time. Panic began to set in. I knew I couldn't lead this car to my building, so I took a detour, weaving through unfamiliar streets in an attempt to lose them. But no matter where I turned, they followed, their persistence unyielding. My heart raced as I tried to think of a plan. Then, a moment of clarity struck. I needed to find safety. I searched for the nearest police station on my GPS and headed straight for it. As I neared the station, the car suddenly turned off onto another street, disappearing into the night as quickly as it had appeared. Relief flooded over me, but it was tinged with lingering fear. I parked near the station and waited, ensuring I was truly alone before heading home. That night, as I locked my door and double-checked the windows, the weight of what had almost happened settled over me. Who was he? The man from the bar? Someone else entirely? I didn't have answers, but one thing was clear: his intentions weren't innocent. The memory of that night remains vivid, a stark reminder of how quickly the warmth of celebration can turn to chilling fear. The night was supposed to be an escape, a fun outing with friends to welcome the new year with joy and excitement. It started innocently enough, a group of us hopping from bar to bar, laughing, dancing, and soaking in the lively atmosphere of the city. But as the hours passed, something began to feel off, a subtle disturbance I couldn't quite place at first. At one of the bars I noticed him, a man in his 50s with a long beard and unkempt hair. He approached me, his smile too wide, his demeanor unsettling. "Can I buy you a drink?" he asked. Politely, I declined, explaining I wasn't drinking that night. His smile faltered, but he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he lingered, his eyes scanning me in a way that made my skin crawl. After a moment, he walked away, blending into the crowd, but I could feel his gaze on me from across the room. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing. But when we moved to another bar, there he was again. This time, he kept his distance, but the feeling of unease grew stronger. Why was he here? Was it just a coincidence? I stayed close to my friends, hoping his presence was nothing more than a strange chance encounter. The night wore on, and eventually, it was time to head home. I dropped off my friends one by one, the city streets quiet and still in the early hours of the morning. It wasn't until I was alone, driving toward my own apartment, that I noticed it, a car following me. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. But turn after turn, the car remained behind me, its headlights a constant presence in my rearview mirror. The realization hit me like a cold wave: it was him. Panic bubbled in my chest as I tried to think of what to do. I didn't want to lead him to my apartment, but I couldn't keep driving aimlessly. Desperately, I made a series of sudden turns, trying to lose him. Each time, he mirrored my moves. My hands trembled on the wheel as I remembered his face, the way he had looked at me earlier that night. Then, an idea struck me: the police station. I quickly searched for the nearest one on my phone and headed straight there, my heart pounding with every mile. The car followed me all the way to the station's parking lot, but as soon as I pulled in, it sped away into the night. I sat there for several minutes, trying to calm my racing heart. The parking lot felt like a haven, the bright lights offering a sense of safety I hadn't felt since the night began. Eventually, I made my way home, constantly checking my mirrors to ensure I wasn't being followed again. The man from the bars never reappeared, but his actions left a lasting impression. That night, I learned the value of trusting my instincts and acting on them, even when fear threatens to take over. It's a memory that reminds me to stay vigilant, especially when the shadows seem to move just a little too closely for comfort. The clock had barely struck midnight, the air still vibrant with the echoes of cheers and laughter as people celebrated the arrival of the new year. I was hosting a small gathering at my apartment, a cozy space shared with a few close friends. The night had been filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses as we toasted to a fresh start. But as the night deepened, the atmosphere began to shift. It started with a knock at the door. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Perhaps a neighbor had a quick request or wanted to join in on the festivities. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. Just an empty hallway bathed in dim light. I closed the door, brushing it off as a prank, and returned to my friends. We laughed about it, chalking it up to someone trying to mess around on New Year's Eve. A little while later, it happened again, another knock. This time, I moved quickly, hoping to catch whoever it was. Again, no one was there. I stepped into the hallway, scanning the area for any sign of movement, but it was eerily quiet. My friends teased me, saying I was overthinking it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The third knock came about 30 minutes later, and this time, I managed to catch a glimpse of someone, a shadow disappearing around the corner. Fueled by a mix of frustration and curiosity, I ran after them, but by the time I reached the stairwell, they were gone. The hallway felt colder than it should have, and my heart raced as I returned to the apartment. The incident became a running joke among my friends for the rest of the night, but deep down, I felt uneasy. Hours passed, and the party wound down. My friends began to leave, and soon I was alone in the apartment, cleaning up the remnants of the celebration. The silence felt heavier now, the earlier warmth of the evening replaced by a lingering sense of unease. That's when it happened again, a knock, louder and more deliberate than before. This time, I didn't answer immediately. I stood frozen, staring at the door. After a moment, I peered through the peephole, and there he was. A man I didn't recognize stood there, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He didn't move, didn't shift his weight, he just stood there, as though waiting for me to open the door. Something about his presence felt wrong, too deliberate, too still. I didn't open the door. Instead, I backed away slowly, watching as he lingered for what felt like an eternity before finally walking away. The relief was short-lived. The next morning, I awoke to the unsettling sight of police cars parked outside the building. News spread quickly. A man in the building had been attacked by someone who had knocked on his door the night before. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It had to be the same man. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to opening that door. To this day, I wonder what might have happened if I had. That night wasn't just a cautionary tale, it was a stark reminder that sometimes, the most ordinary moments can turn into something deeply unsettling. The stillness of the night was shattered by the faint hum of my phone vibrating on the table. I glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight, marking the arrival of a new year. My friends and I had just left the crowded bars, each of us buzzing with the joy and exhaustion of celebration. As I picked up my phone, the screen illuminated with a message from an unknown number. The text was simple, yet unsettling. "Hi." Initially, I brushed it off. It was late, and people often sent messages to the wrong number in the chaos of festivities. I silenced my phone and continued enjoying the moment with my friends. But as the night stretched on, the texts became more frequent, more pointed. Each message carried a weight, a familiarity that began to feel invasive. The tone shifted from casual to demanding, with messages like, "Answer me," and later, "I hate you." The following year, I'd all but forgotten about the incident. Life moved on, and New Year's Eve arrived once more. As the clock struck midnight, I felt the familiar buzz of my phone. A single word stared back at me from the same unknown number. "Hi." My chest tightened as the memory of the previous year flooded back. Who was this person? Why had they chosen New Year's Eve to reach out? That year, I decided to respond. I asked who they were and why they kept messaging me. But just like before, there was no immediate reply. Hours later, I received a curt response. "I hate you." The randomness of it all was deeply unsettling. It wasn't a prank that a friend would play, it felt too calculated, too personal. By the third year, I had resigned myself to the strange ritual. Midnight arrived, and my phone buzzed. "Hi." This time, I didn't bother responding. Whoever it was didn't seem interested in having a conversation, only in making their presence known. The consistency of the messages, the precision of their timing, only added to the eerie nature of the situation. As the fourth year approached, I couldn't shake the anticipation. Would it happen again? And if it did, what did it mean? This wasn't just a wrong number or a casual prank. It felt intentional, as though someone out there was keeping track of me, waiting for this exact moment each year. I still don't know who it was or what their purpose might have been, but the experience left me questioning how much of our lives are truly private and how much is vulnerable to unseen eyes. The final year was different. As New Year's Eve approached, the thought of that message consumed me. For 3 consecutive years, it had arrived at exactly the same moment, with the same eerie precision. This time, I decided I wouldn't wait passively. I would be prepared. I spent the day combing through old messages, trying to piece together any clues about the sender. Who were they? Why had they chosen me? Midnight approached, and my phone sat face up on the table, its glow the only light in the room. The seconds ticked down, and my heart raced in anticipation. Would they text again? Was this the year I would finally get answers? 12:01 a.m. My phone lit up, and there it was. Hi! I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I typed out a response, something I hadn't tried before. Who are you? Why do you keep doing this? For the first time, I got an immediate reply. You don't remember, do you? My heart froze. The words hit me like a wave, bringing a flood of confusion and unease. Remember what? I replied, but there was no answer. I waited for hours, staring at the screen, but the silence remained. It was maddening, the feeling of being so close to a revelation yet still in the dark. To this day, I haven't received another message. The texts stopped as abruptly as they began, leaving me with nothing but questions and a lingering sense of unease. Every New Year's Eve, I glance at my phone at midnight, half expecting to see that haunting "hi" appear once again. This story serves as a reminder of how easily the boundaries of our lives can blur, how a seemingly random event can burrow into your mind and stay with you forever. Sometimes, the answers we seek are never revealed, leaving us to grapple with mysteries that feel all too personal. As the clock strikes midnight this year, remember to cherish the known and embrace the unknown, for life is a delicate mix of both. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and as always, stay safe. Thank you for joining me on this unsettling journey, and I'll see you next time.